And maybe in the future, I also don't need a money emitter. I am the currency. I decide which currency do I want to use. Do I want to use the currency of wisdom, the currency? I can use many currencies because data, if you wish, is like money. It sits in a wallet. It has value. It is mine. I don't want anybody to tell me what to do with it, whenever, wherever, whatever I want to do. I want to invest in it so its value will accrue, and then I want to either give it to my nears and dears or donate it to the humanity. It doesn't matter. So if every time we hear the word dollar, we use it and we say the word data, this is the exercise that I do in my head. You understand that the 23 and Me, which the conversation is about dollars, oh, look, they got so much money and I didn't get anything from it, is a question of data. And why is this rooted in dignity? Is because we are our actions. And our actions are captured in data. So every time a third party uses it, loses it, or abuses it, they take a piece of me. That's why it's not ethical.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Beneficial General Intelligence Summit. Today's guest is a rare synthesis of medical doctor, academic researcher, and lecturer, scientist, philosopher, and systems architect. And if I may, self described as part crazy, part genius. Dr. Alex Cahana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Intellectual anarchist, let's call it that way.
Intellectual anarchist, even better from what I know about you. Well, I will not attempt to describe you any further. I will let you do that yourself in the context of our conversation. So, we last time met in New York. I remember it was just as about, I was about to take off from my hotel to interview the epic personality, another part genius, part crazy, which is Howard Bloom at his apartment. And that was an excellent podcast, which we did in person. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that with you when I met you, but I was so mesmerized by your ideas and what you do that it felt like I am being embraced by a giant octopus with scintillating arms going in every direction, and I couldn't pin it down no matter how hard I tried. You reminded me of usually for me at least, hardly to grasp concept of open-ended intelligence. This was proposed by Professor Weaver Weinbaum, who is one of our collaborators on the Beneficial General Intelligence project. And he wrote a book with this title of Open-Ended Intelligence. So if you and our audience wants to look into that, maybe you can understand what I mean when I'm trying to introduce Dr. Alex Cahana here. Because in the marketing attention preying economy, we are used to nail it, to categorize, and put everything in a box and add some shiny glitz to non-value that we don't realize how much it limits us and dragged us down on the vortex of no return. However, what I remember from our vast conversation, which covered so much, what stuck with me was your unwavering commitment to unravel how technology can serve not just performance, but dignity, sovereignty, and human flourishing. And Alex, you've worked across vastly different systems, from clinical rehabilitation, from what I know, anyway, you are a medical doctor, to AI governance, to token economies. Is there a unified thread, some principles that guide your approach to innovation? And if I may disclose, from what you told me, I remember you mentioned love people and use things and not the other way around. And in the era of the mobile phone, when I feel separation distress, if I don't have my phone next to me, and it's more important than, maybe sometimes human interaction. And this is if you go in every metro we see this sad reality. I think this reminder is so important.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I also remember very fondly our conversation, almost coming home and saying, ah, finally, I met someone who understands me. I feel 5 milligrams less crazy. So do thank you so much. I think I love this open-ended intelligence. I think we used to call it at a time homme de renaissance, polymath. Now I think it's called a multi-potentialite, and it really speaks to the different personas that we envelope in each and every one of us. And I do think that that unifying principle that you mentioned about loving people and using things instead of loving things and using people is kind of like that thread that connects it. When I hear dollar, I hear the word data, and we are now living in this data economy. And of course, we can talk about a lot of things: post-labor economics, singularity, all these things that we read and hear a lot about. But I just, because I'm biased, my training in medicine was in pain medicine, so I saw pain, I saw suffering, and always was interested in technology integration in the clinical workflow, really loved decentralized technologies as a software solution to the social problem of trust. And I think that really in this post COVID world that we're living, trust has eroded so much to the point that we have challenges of cooperating. Technologists are interested in interoperability. You and I are interested in intercooperability. And so I really think that we can talk in many different ways about this. But I do think that in this world, we should not worry too much about the different types of intelligences, artificial intelligence or extended intelligence or open intelligence, but worry more about natural stupidity. And I think that if we can kind of like really be a little bit more careful in our thinking, to your point, pay a little bit more attention to what are the beliefs that are nourishing our thoughts, which are nourishing our actions and our habits and our character. This really ties into our overall unifying narrative of humanity.
True, so true. And you worked across continents, yeah, from Africa to Latin America to more recently, you visited Bhutan. And you designed and advised on decentralized systems that go beyond infrastructure to tokenize intangible assets like well being, trust, culture, and even spiritual capital. And, I have so many questions about that. And of course, we will get to them. But first, to continue along the line of sort of your amazingly ethical career pathway, I would call it. Yeah, this northern light that guided you. So from professing as a normal, let's say normal physician, yeah, who prescribed painkillers, let's say, yes, to reimagining economics by itself, yes, not as extraction but as regeneration, not as GDP, but as gross national happiness, by asking not only what's next or what can make me more money, or okay, let's get rid of this patient because there's a big line, long line at my office, but asking what is worthy of doing. So the question is now, you also mentioned that infrastructure alone is not enough. So, this technology, blockchain, artificial intelligence, I mean, we can use them as much as we want, but they can, and at least in my opinion, because I've been also, and I still am, of course, a great believer in blockchain as a trust machine, if I am to paraphrase Michael Casey's book, but or the truth machine, how he calls it. However, this promise wasn't realized because now crypto is also just another mechanism for gaming the system. So you mentioned also that we have to encode values in the infrastructure. So my question is, how can we learn to distinguish between infrastructure that enables autonomy and this freedom and ethics, and systems that subtly use it to erode trust and to game the system? Is there any trick to that?
This is a very deep question that is, and all my conversations with you are philosophical by nature. But I do want to give it kind of like a more practical kind of feel to it so that the readers will appreciate that this is not just a thought experiment. Knowing our conversation today, I permitted myself to post in LinkedIn the utility of thinking of blockchains as cities. And yeah, we talk about blockchains as a better internet and some peer-to-peer network and all that. And I think it has its limits because when you think about it like that, you think of centralization, you think of power. We got to win. We got to be better. And it's just a growth with no control. And in medicine we call it cancer. So I think that just like cities, some cities, urban planning is more present and they're built as other, better. And you're like, oh my God, this is so citizen driven, citizen centric, which others is like, oh, what a mess, what chaos, or this was built for cars and not for me. I think that thinking of blockchains as cities is an easy way to understand what it is. That cities require roads and transportation. So these could be like the basic layers, the L1s that we call, and public transport would be the nodes, and buildings and skyscrapers that are building on would be the L2 and L3s, and the utilities are computational power, if you wish, or data storage. And the citizens of the city are the users, and they have activities that are captured by tokens, and we want everything safe, so we want it encrypted. Blockchain has elements of governance to it, and so to your point, how do we want that city to be extractive and exclusionary and exploitative, or to be inclusive and grounded in nature and hospitable? And how do upgrades look like, and communities that we call DAO? So you get the fact. I even toyed and said, okay, so if I have to choose, well, what would be Bitcoin? And for me, like I say, like I lived 10 years in Geneva, so obviously I'm like very biased, but say like Bitcoin is Geneva. It's very purist, it's very secretive, it's very money centric. There's a proof of work. You have to be in Geneva a hardworking Calvinist, and you got to prove work and trustworthiness and all that. And Ethereum probably makes me feel like I live in New York. So it's kind of like New York City. It's congested, it's slow, it's expensive, full of talent, and improvements take forever. But very opinionated and think that they're the center of the world. So there's a lot of ways to use that, to think of a blockchain as an ecosystem and not a widget that's supposed to do something. And to your point, that right now, this kind of like uh, crypto deregulation, or crypto, I want to say, penetration into the public consciousness is really where you and I need to step in and give people nuance. And they should really celebrate the right things and not the wrong things, because then, to your point, it's just going to be the digitization of things that are not working right now for humanity. And so that's kind of how I approach it. And maybe just one more remark to your point of ethical considerations. We are not, in general, in technology, this is not just blockchain, we are not thinking systematically about ethics. That is why ethical principles or ethical recommendations look like a laundry list of prohibitions that the human genius will always kind of like find a way to over, yeah, to game, to loophole it. And so, being a physician myself who has an advanced degree in philosophy and medical humanities, in medicine we talk about respecting autonomy and do no harm, right? Primum non nocere, do no harm, non-maleficent, maleficence. We talk about beneficence, distributed justice. So I think that in the same way we can think of technology and say, okay, first of all, transparency. It has to be transparent. The more transparent it is, the more ethical it is. So I'm not saying that everything needs to be transparent. There might be some conditions where we want some type of non-transparency, but I'm saying be aware that things that are not transparent are less ethical. And so that is one guiding principle. The second guiding principle would be bias. We talk a lot about bias, but what I mean bias is that bias is ingrained in the system, that we have like these presuppositions, these automatic truisms that were never visited and never vetted, and there's like these assumptions. So how do we create kind of a suspension of beliefs when we develop these programs, a bracketing, if you wish, of our thoughts? And then the third would be, I want to say, data minimization as opposed to data maximization. That right now it's kind of like automatic that we scrape all the data. And I think technologists are starting to realize that it's starting to collapse under the weight of the data and the cost and the energetic cost that comes with it. But and we're talking about small language models and individual language models, and how, not only do we make LLMs dumber, LLMs might make us dumber. So there's like this idea of let's ethically understand if data maximization should be the default mode. And then the last, and for me, that is the strongest, and you know that in medicine we call it distributed justice. You know, do the golden rule: do to others what you would do to yourself. Is really this distributed benefits. Is it cannot be that all the wealth and power of the world is among 147 families. It just doesn't work that way. It's not regenerative, it's not sustainable. It's not for moral issues. It's just not good business. So I think that if we imagine technology as a city and how that city is built, and we understand that that city has some ethical principles that guide it, why did we build this city this way? I think we'll be able to solve a lot of problems and a lot of unforeseen consequences.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And of course, all these principles, especially transparency, yes, are how can I say, native to the blockchain ethics, if I may call it this way. But from Ricardian contracts to DAO governance or constitutional vaults, you have built value architecture. So, when you mentioned this city metaphor, if I may, I immediately, it brought me to this, your idea of value architectures, yes, that blend cryptographic integrity, speaking of the principles and they are manifested through the principles which you just mentioned, with ethical purpose, which is at the core of all what you do. So my question is, how did you come to see Ricardian contracts and these constitutional vaults as tools for embedding ethics and trust into tokenized systems? And I must say, for our audience, for those who don't know, but I'm sure they know, you are an expert in tokenization, and that's why you are advising around the world. You also have co-purchased the Satoshi Island, which is an example of tokenized everything kind of systems. And in Bhutan, you work directly with the king of Bhutan on the tokenized everything paradigm. But why these tools? Yes, Ricardian contracts and other tools which you are using.
So,
Um,
so thank you for that question, and I want to unpack it because in it there are a couple of questions. So, first of all, I want to recognize the dozens of people who have inspired me and have taught me, and we've had amazing conversations like I'm having with you, of really sharpening our thoughts and co-creating. So this is by no means, something that I'm doing alone. The structure, I need to recognize Pamela Norton, who was the head of Tidal Chain and the Tidal Chain Foundation, who wrote a white paper called the M5 framework, the Money Five, which really lends on the decentralized version of the M1 to M4 traditional financial centralized world. So she herself is just a genius and a luminary, and has structured a M5, if you wish, digital superstructure that serves well in multiple communities. And I invite people to pay attention to that. Obviously, the work of Will Ruddock in grassroots economics, who is just amazing. Of course, uh, of course, and same thing with Arthur Brock and Fernanda Ibarra, who are doing amazing jobs in building, these communities and current see, how seeing each other and the flow of energy. So yeah, yes, and I would be amiss not to mention, the guys in Radical Exchange, Glenn Posner and Eric Whale, who've been always kind of thinking about how can we make economic systems better, and Sherman Voshmgir, who talks about DAOs and tokens like no one else. So there are a lot of people that I owe my knowledge to their hard work. I do, however, want to answer directly to your question about the constitutional part of it. And that is, it really boils down back to the definition of what is tokenization. And for me, it's simply the process of converting something of value, which we usually think about a contract, a land deed, a bond, a security, but also it could be a medical record, a policy, a piece of art, or a prayer into a digital format, which is blockchain. So that's really what it is. We take something of value and convert it into something digital, not only for its perennity and security and privacy, but also to be able to quantify it in such a way that it can be saved, but it also can be exchanged and it can be traded. Now you can ask me, okay, so how do you? I understand you can barter between a banana and an apple, but how do you exchange between this great conversation and a beautiful piece of art, or falling in love and a prayer? It's like how do you start to do that? And I think that um, uh, it's a deep question that has, I want to say, philosophical aspects to it. Like, should we commoditize everything in life? Obviously not. But should we measure everything and recognize everything? Then the answer is obviously yes. And so, do I see a world where we have reputational finance, where our social capital is a collateral? Absolutely. And just to give it a little bit of flavor, uh, visited a village in Bhutan, a very spiritual country. Everybody, the all 800,000, practice meditation and spiritual activities every day. It is a significant amount of their economy is embedded in that. And so, how do you capture that? How do you capture that invisible activity that is not represented in GDP, which is just production and consumption? And of course, they didn't need my help. They came up years ago with the Gross National Happiness Index that has a lot of domains and a lot of I want to say indicators that are both subjective and objective. But just to give the listeners an idea of how we could quantify that or capture that, is there is this concept in informational science of, how do we measure the quality or the quantity of information that is transferred? It's I think it's called Shannon's entropy, and the easiest way for me to understand it is like if I state something to you that you already know, that's the information transfer. That's like, okay, I heard that before. Then obviously there's no entropy here. It's all ordered, and there's no value. So it's like, okay, thank you, Captain Obvious, for saying whatever I know. But on the other hand, if I say something to you that is totally new, totally inspiring, totally like maximum entropy, this is chaotic. I need to wrap my head around it. I need to build order around it and put energy to deconstruct it. That is maximum entropy. You could say that's a one or infinite or whatever. And so you can value that. So you can see that again, if anybody thinks that there are solid answers to all this, then they don't understand what co-creation is. But I think it is, and this is something I said to my audience in Bhutan. I said, listen to this talk not with an open mind, but with an open heart.
Mm.
Because if you listen to it with an open mind, there's just too much in here. There's like, this is a work, I am now speaking the work of 24 people for 20 years. This is 500 years of information. I don't understand a word Dr. Kahana is saying. But if you listen with an open heart, you say, I don't understand what he's saying, but I understand his intention.
Yes.
So tokenization is revealing intention.
Mm.
And I'll finish with that point and say, so if your intention, and we always say Bitcoin. Well, I forget the authors of Bitcoin resistance money. They say if you resist something good, then you're bad, and if you resist something bad, then you're good. So tokenization just reveals your intention, and it doesn't matter what your intention is, but at least it's transparent, and at least I know. And I'll stop here.
Indeed, because as I was mentioning, also my personal disappointment somehow. Yes, we were hoping that blockchain will be the catalyst of the major transformation in the world. Yes, from GDP to national happiness. And that automatically the whole world will unfold on that on that new infrastructure. And however, yes, you're right. How you tokenize, there is the secret. And what I wanted to, because now you already moved into the Bhutan innovation, their decision to tokenize the gross national happiness, I think this is a definitely a radical departure from what we know about economics and the GDP based metrics. Their approach is more like what you called sacred economy, and this is just such a beautiful term and so true. And as you mentioned, open heart. I was mentioning open-ended intelligence, but maybe you are more correct. Open heart, and I know that your approach is also. And I heard one of your I think it was a live panel from Silicon Valley when you were talking, when, kind of about COVID and saying that, well, we are entangled by definition. And, and what they tried to do was to actually separate us. And that was big damage done. And I think this sacred economy is exactly manifesting that entanglement, yes, and enabling it through tokenization. As an example, and this entanglement is not only between us as humans but between us and Gaia, yes, as you also refer to. And you give this example from what Bhutan is doing, which I was not aware, that for example, if someone owns land and they just don't take care of it, the land appreciates, and it will be taxed higher. And if they don't actually cultivate it or use it for something, then they will be incentivized to sell it rather than keep it. And I think this is so important. If you can elaborate or maybe hint to how such thinking could be useful to the design of DAO governance or regenerative tokenization that would enable this, what you refer to, and I call it the symbiotic economy,
Mm-hmm.
protective of Gaia.
Yeah. So I want to say first of all that this is a work in progress. And we are very fortunate to have His Majesty, who basically directed tokenization with the intent, and those are his words, of shared prosperity. And shared prosperity, by no definition, is redistribution of production or wealth or things of that sort. So we're not looking at that. But that the intention of capital markets is to invest and cultivate the commons. That is why Bhutan is a carbon negative country, because by constitution, it maintains 75 or 78% of its land needs to remain green. That is why they are guided not only by His Majesty's decree, but the values that are embedded in their faith. And so, from that, everything else stems. So, to your point, for example, on land tokenization, right now, the way land tokenization is going on in the world, and to your point, yes, it is disappointing. I also think it's actually boring and vanilla, is basically digitizing the process of land registration and land purchase and transfer. So, is it bad? Of course not. It's great. It automates it. It saves the data. It discourages, fraud and resolves uncertainty of ownership and things of that sort. But it really, because it's not attached to a constitutional vault, it's not constitution, it's not attached to some type of master non-fungible contract. And when we say Ricardian from the King Richard, we mean that it's legally obliging. It has that legal enforcement behind it. When it's not attached to any ground, it's just like a leaf in the air that is ephemeric, and okay, I built this today, but tomorrow I'll change my mind. So the idea of how do we capture not the land, but what we do as humans on that land. Do we, what is our land stewardship? Do we conserve it? Do we preserve it? Do we build on it? If we build on it, then how do we tax it? So to your point, the George tax, there's that, it's called land value tax, is not the way we do it here in New York, where if I make my loft more expensive, I have to pay more tax. So for me, I'm incentivized to keep it a dump. There, it's the opposite. That when you don't develop it, it is very expensive. Why don't you just build on it beautiful things that are meaningful for the community? So I don't know, like if I'm building a hot tub in the village is something that should, end with increasing value. I'm not against hot tubs, but if you build, for example, a space for meditation and prayer and reflection, a class for school, or that's something that increases the value of the community. So how do we redirect our economic efforts, our interactions, if you wish, our entanglement, to use your words, together? That's what creates that weaving that makes our communities resilient and regenerative. So, I am very fortunate to be part of an excellent group of luminaries called DRTC, the Deep Rapid Transformation Convergence. These are all people who work in large organizations in the United Nations, and it came after the call of Secretary General to kind of say, okay, how do we accelerate the adoption of SDGs? And the way the group is doing this is through a unity narrative. And so, I can go when I talk to non tech folks, it can be very, I want to say soft and say, well, it's all about love. Love is living one vibrational energy. And, love is basically our entanglement that transcends space and time. And, when there's someone out there and you feel that, sure, we can have that conversation. It would resonate with a lot of people. But for those who are hardcore, show me the numbers, show me the viability, show me the business model, nail it, don't open. I think that what is challenging them to understand where is the gap is the concept of ownership. Because in their world, Ownership means it's mine, it's not yours. And if you want access to mine, you got to pay for it. And if you don't pay for it, I'll sue you. And so this creates a very exploitative, extractive, exclusionary world, which frankly is kind of miserable to live in. But if we think of ownership as owning our commitments, owning our promises, and you look at them as debt and credit, right? I promised you something, so I have a debt towards you. And you are giving me credit and saying, I've done my due diligence and you're not a risk. And so I'm giving you this credit at, good conditions. And we have now did a knowledge exchange that, if you wish, can be captured by tokens. It can be done. And so this is what I want people to understand, that there is now a fusion, especially with Web3, especially with what AI is able to do today, especially with what blockchain is able to do today. We can actually start to capture the non-tangibles that are spoken explicitly in the GNH and the gross national happiness. And so it doesn't just have to be land tokens and health tokens, it can also be wisdom tokens and faith
Mm,
tokens and
wow.
sacred tokens.
That's really amazing. And as you were talking about this owning our commitments and in this accountability, yes, which can be realized indeed and tokenized, it also comes to mind this commitment pooling, which Will Rudick is has introduced, and actually he experiments with that in Africa. So that we can actually have these commitments tokenized, and we can create a moneyless economy, as you were saying. I mean, what are money? Are some colored? You just don't have some colored paper. But if we can exchange this energy and our commitments, that will really build a better economy. And I think that's what also what I see happening in Bhutan as well. Can I well, I don't want to nudge you, but just thinking about this, like as the example with the land, yeah, which you gave, and I'm just thinking that now the state, let's put it this way, or His Majesty will monitor what we do on our land and so on and so forth. What came to mind is like, doesn't that, well, I mean, I can see the positive, definitely. But doesn't that start to look a bit like social credit, which also China is using? And we here in the West, we deride. I'm just wondering your opinion about social credit. Is it really bad? And where do we draw the line? Where is it good and where does it start to be intrusive and go towards authoritarian?
Yeah.
What's your opinion there?
Excellent question, and I've been asked that a few times and forced to think about it. Uh, um,
I'm
I,
happy you thought already.
yeah, so before I answer that, I just want to say that you're so right about the paper money, and that is one thing that I said in Bhutan that resonates a lot with people, and that is they are not poor; they're just cash poor, and that is a big
Mhm.
difference. And that's what, and this kind of goes back a little bit to dignity, is that we are not poor, right? We have our value. Just by being human, we have a value. But
Totally.
also our DNA, our histories, our herstories, they all have value. And I do see a world not only that is moneyless, but also that it's a C to C to C economy. It's not B2B or B2B to C, or it is, we are sovereign, not only free to finance, which is the opposite of what happens now in Europe. Like, what I think it's now, if you have to notify in Spain the authorities if you spend more than 3,000 euros, or in UK, if you leave more than three times a year, then you're on a list of surveillance. So I'm very sensitive to your point of you know centralized surveillance. And so this is a segue to your question of that smell of credit scoring. that I think that what we're trying to work in Bhutan is a centralized coordination, because centralization is not bad. There are some good things that come in with centralization. Otherwise, just things are just, there's too much friction and too much, you know, too many moving parts. So a centralized coordination, but a decentralized governance. That's really it is. That it's owned by no one and owned by everyone. It's owned by Gaia, and that's really the difference when you say what is the threshold, and this is where data can really serve as a good gauge of where are we in terms of our planetary health. That if everyone has a wallet, like in Bhutan, they have their national digital identity, and in that wallet there are different tokens that represent pieces of information, pieces of data about them that are verified, that are oracled, that know your client, know your transaction. So I can write on LinkedIn, king of the world, and I know many of my friends won't believe it, but there might be some people that will think that I'm king of the world because there's no vetting process. And so when we have single sources of truth where the nodes serve as notaries, and that transparency creates that trust. That is the modus operandi of our life. We have transparency, trust, not just oh, Alex looks like a nice guy, but computational trust. Then we can tokenize, which means attach value to that, and that person can become what Pamela Norton calls the bank of me. Okay, I become the bank of me, and then we are the bank of we, and we can be the bank of us, and not the bank of a sovereign state, which also has its role. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have sovereign banks, but also we should have in radical markets the banks of me, and then we can track it, and we can and trade it, track or trail it, and then trade it. And this is where comes in these concepts of liquid democracy and the holographic, I want to say, mirror of what the community wants, what's the intention of the community. So one village would not be similar to the others. That's why I like this kind of like city. Each blockchain is a different city because there are no two cities that are alike. And so if you like to go to Los Angeles or Vegas, then use Solana. That's good for decentralized the gaming and media and all that. And if you want to do science, then use say. It's good, it'll be like Boston and San Diego. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that technology does nothing. It's what we do with that technology that makes a difference. We take that hammer to sculpt, David, or do we take it and just bust, all the Buddhas out there in Afghanistan? And that as a person, I can gauge the health of my community by the sovereignty of my data. Do I own it? Do I trade it? Or am I unfree to do? And again, my approach is, and again, I don't want to be too philosophical here. There are a lot of uh, conversations on how do you stay free in an unfree society, and it doesn't matter if it's a society that a government that rules capital like China, or capital that rules government like in the United States. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's like, where am I? In both situations, I'm a nobody. And that's what we need to strive for. And that in this data economy, we are giving the villagers what Will is giving, in Kilifi or in East Kenya, what Mike is giving in El Zonte in El Salvador, what Prospero is trying to do, is about giving people the ability to be major stakeholders in the economic activity of their environment.
I really loved it how you, as a medical doctor, you phrased it like the health of my community. And when you mentioned this bank of me, it brought me to a work by the founder of Zipcar, Robin, and she published in the end a book called Peers Incorporated. It's very similar with this concept of the bank of me and the bank of we, and how we create this self-organizing communities with the liquid democracy and all that. But now, because we are here at the health of the community, um, another thing came to mind from what you shared about your work in Bhutan. And there was something which really was kind of, it struck me. So, paraphrasing 2023 and me, now
Mhm.
23 and mine. Can you please elaborate on that? What is that about? It was in one of your diagrams related to tokenize everything, to
Yeah.
this commitment to tokenize everything.
Yeah, no,
Please.
it's a very astute observation, and I'm glad that you brought it up. I want to talk a little bit about 23andMe in a different way that everybody's talking. And, uh, because everybody feels that it's not fair that they gave their genetic data and they're not involved in the benefits from it. And so that's not a hard, that's almost like. Exactly. It's almost clickbait. To be upset about that is also to see I'm upset with the current state of capitalism. So it's not, that's not, there's nothing inspiring in it. But the 23 and mine, if you wish, is the genomic data version of the M5 ecosystem. In other words, if indeed you believe that transparency creates trust and this trust needs to be valued by a token, if you really think that each person is a sovereign bank, a bank of me, which is not hard to understand, by the way, because you and I, you remember when we were younger, when we would travel, we would go to a travel agent, not because we were rich, but because that was the only way to do it. Now we have no problem to be our own travel agents. It took me years to realize that wonderful Sarah, she was like, I thought she was giving me the best deals. She was actually giving me the worst deals because that was the incentive for her to take care of herself. So all these trust agents became untrustworthy agents. And blockchain brought in the disintermediation, the trustlessness. I don't need anymore a travel agent. I don't need a broker. I don't need an investor. And I also don't need a bank. And maybe in the future, I also don't need a money emitter. I am the currency. I decide which currency do I want to use. Do I want to use the currency of wisdom, the currency? I can use many currencies because data, if you wish, is like money. It sits in a wallet. It has value. It is mine. I don't want anybody to tell me what to do with it whenever, wherever, whatever I want to do. I want to invest in it so its value will accrue, and then I want to either give it to my nears and dears or donate it to the humanity. It doesn't matter. So if every time we hear the word dollar, we use it and we say the word data, this is the exercise that I do in my head. You understand that the 23 and me, which the conversation is about dollars, oh, look, they got so much money and I didn't get anything from it, is a question of data. And why is this rooted in dignity? Is because we are our actions. And our actions are captured in data. So every time a third party uses it, loses it, or abuses it, they take a piece of me. That's why it's not ethical. It's not ethical because you cheat on me. You can say, okay, look, I'm very biomimetic. I believe in nature. So the impala doesn't say to the lion, "Oh, why did you eat me up?" It's like the lion says, "That's my role. I'm supposed to eat you, and you're supposed to run away." And indulge with me 30 seconds for a story so you understand why it's important to create this biomimesis. Is when I was in the Mara, I was looking at the big cats, and I asked my friend Joab, it's like, why are the cats so skinny? Are they on Ozempic? And he said, no, it rains so much that the grass is so high and I can't see impalas. They can't see impalas and they get skinny, and then the hyenas injure them, and then they eat them. And I'm like, that's horrible. What will happen when there won't be any lions anymore? And they'll say, well, then there'll be too many impalas. They'll eat all the grass. Then they'll be skinny, and then the hyenas will eat them. I said, "Oh my God, no, no, no lions, no hyenas, no, no, no lions, no impalas. What's that?" And he said, "There'll be just hyenas." And I said, "And then what?" He said, "They'll eat themselves." And I said, "You just described New York City." So the point being is that we don't need just regenerative finance. We don't need just decentralized finance. We need regenerative, decentralized finance for a digital economy where it really replicates the forces of nature. So it's okay that there are people that want to rug pull and shill and be hyenas. It's okay. It's part of nature. I'm not upset with them, but it can't be just hyenas. And it's okay that there are people that want to hold and build, huddle and biddle and just want to keep this forever. It's fine too. But it can't be just Impala. So what you don't want is to mix them in the same liquidity pool, because then you create these false price pressures. You create, fast token velocities with slow token velocities and price pressures that just penalize people that have different intentions. This is why the definition of tokens reveal intention is so powerful. It's like, what do you want to do with it? So the 23 and mine, that token says, I want to share. It's mine. I own it, but I want to share it in a way that I am part of that activity.
That's amazing, and it brings me to another. I think it's kind of similar example, because we are working on artificial intelligence and building conscious AI, and James Tagg, who is one of our collaborators, actually is building artificial brains from organoids. So
Mm-hmm.
he takes parts of your skin, sends them to space to mature quickly, and then he builds those. But so from different, from various people, but then if it's mine, it's exactly that concept. It's done on blockchain. So because so when my brain organoid is used, then I will be rewarded. So it's really and of course it can be done much more complex, to the extent this mind concept, yes, is being preserved. So I think this is totally so important, and I wanted, I have kind of related questions here. So in this tokenizing intangible domains like spirituality, community, you've mentioned, at least in your work and in your articles, faith coins, faith exchanges. Uh, what would a properly designed spiritual or cultural marketplace, if I can call it this way, for lack of a better word, what would that look like, and how do we avoid the risk of gamification, all these downsides, scavengers preying on them?
Yeah. Um, so first of all, I think that it's very important to design what exists and not design what you have in your head and then
Mm.
give it to people and use it. This is what Silicon Valley has been doing for the last decades. Is you have a bunch of really smart people. They identify a problem from their vantage point, and they develop a solution which is amazing. And then they're presupposing the generalizability of that solution, when actually it has to be what we said before, the holographic, the mirror representation of the community. So the first question is the community happy? If the community is happy, just leave them alone. It's like there's nothing needs to be done. I remember going into the Amazons, or what is it? The famous story with I think Oscar Wilde that sees this fisherman in Lake Titicaca and says, why are you fishing and not going to school? And he says, why would I go to school? He says, so you can get work. Why would I work? To make money. Why money? To go on vacation. Where to go on vacation? I'm going to Titicaca and fish. And he said, okay, so this is what I'm doing. So, we cannot assume that what people want or what people think that is valuable is actually valuable for them. So baked in your question are a lot of assumptions that people have of commodification, gamification, data maximum. It's like maybe they don't want that. So how would this look like? Let's say a coin. How would that look like? So in the temple, in one of the villages, there are two elderly that always greet everyone. And you walk around the fortune wheel and this, and they greet you, and then you go into the temple. Now, imagine on their phone, because everybody has a phone and has internet and electricity, they just scan, you know, everyone's wallet. That's it, and they go down to the restaurant, and they say to the owner, "Here are all my faith tokens for today," and he gives them a bowl of rice, which he would do anyway as an offering to the temple, but now he's actually feeding someone. And then he goes to the farmer, to the rice farmer, and says, "Give me that farming, give me the rice in discount because I'm a good person." Why are you a good person? Because I have 1,000 people on the ledger that I get. He says, "Oh yeah, you're really a good person." And then he goes to his folks that the suppliers and say, "Why don't you give me in discount or exchange tokens for tokens and give and so." When you start to and this is the work that Will has done, when you start to decouple the dependence of the economic activity on colored paper, not only do you increase their purchasing power, because at the end of the day there might be things that you can only do with colored paper, but you also give them a decisional act of how to value their own economy. Now, obviously, as time goes by, you need to put safeguards. You need to put safeguards on the size of the commitment pool, the size of the credit, just like in a bank. You can't just go to the bank and say, "I want $1 billion because I want to whatever." So you have to kind of like model and understand the dynamics. But the point is that, again, it is decentralized governance. It's determined by the community. And that is why it's important that, at least in the beginning, these things would be local. Because what you don't want is to say, okay, I'll start to do arbitrage. I'll go to the village that sells their tomatoes in 4 tokens and buy it and sell it then in the village that this is for 6 tokens. Because that, again, creates these price pressures that I talked to you about. So I'm not saying that it's simple, but it's absolutely, it's doable. And it's absolutely better than what they have now, which is that if you do not have a bag of colored paper, you can't do anything. And that reminds me of a conversation I had with President Aka in Cote d'Ivoire when we talked about money. And I said to him, I'll tell you a story of I went to your hotel across the street, and I went up and I said, "How much is a room?" He said, $100. I put a $100 bill on the counter and went up. The front desk took that $100 bill, ran to the pharmacist and said, "Here's the money I owe you." The pharmacist went to the butcher and said, "Here's the money I owe you." The butcher went to the woman he met the night before, said, "Here's the money I owe you." She ran back to the hotel, said, "Here's the money I owe you." In the meantime, I come down from the room and say, "I don't like the room," and I take the $100 and I leave. So what just happened? What just happened? There's no consumption, there's no production, there's no nothing. What is the magic in this paper money that lifted 4 Ivorians from poverty? So when people start to understand that money has no intrinsic value, especially since it's been detached, from gold, and start to understand that all what we're talking about are commitments, or like Will likes to call them, vouchers, it's way more understandable. And so I can imagine communities of faith that there's no such thing as gaming. There's no such thing as, if I would say, "Oh, and what about lying?" I remember being in Vanuatu and saying, "Why would I lie?" This is an island. Where would I go? Why would I stay? I asked, do you have police? I said, to do what? You mean like strong boys that help organize events? Yeah, we have that. I said, no, but if someone would steal from you, I said, why would they steal? Where would they go? If he wants something, he just asks me and I give it to him. And I said, yeah, but what if he does something bad to a child or a woman? He said, if he does that, then what he needs is love. What he needs is a doctor. He doesn't need a policeman. So all what I'm saying is they're different sets of values. And I'm not saying that, I'm sure they have audience and say, well, this will never happen in New York or this will never happen in Paris or whatnot. Sure, sure. I'm not ascribing that. But what I'm saying is that the whole concept of tokenization of intangibles is necessary to include people in the economic activity that right now they're excluded. That's the idea.
Yes, and I think it's also about what we measure, the metrics, and as you mentioned, what we value, because what we measure is actually what we value. With regard to this need for police, it brings me to the Burning Man, how it evolved actually, because they said the same. Why would we need here in the desert police? But then, as the community started to grow, some people brought alcohol and they were driving drunk there and they killed people because they were drunk. So that's when they started to realize, well, we need to organize some some policing here. So it's
But
not that simple. If I,
true, but
it's
you
about
understand.
lying and
True, but you understand, Mihaila, that is
yeah.
because the constitutional vault was not existent. Because
Yes.
the implicit value is there is you cannot enter this community if you plan to harm someone.
Yeah.
And that's the because we do not have a constitutional vault or our vault is ambiguous. The, exactly, and the easiest way to think about it, I like to be provocative so people won't forget it. The easiest way is, the people that have the best constitutional vault are nudist colonies. You know why? Because you just have to be naked. That's the only thing. If you don't want to be naked, you can't walk in. And then people say, you know what, it's not for me. Or people can say, I like it. But the point is, you need clarity. So if there is some ambiguity in terms of my relationships with others, is your health my concern? Is your child's education my business? And anything is right. I can be in a community that says, I'm now in New York, and I'm like, if you don't send your daughter to a private school, you're a bad parent. But when I was in Geneva in Switzerland, why are you sending your kid to a private school? You should send them to the public school, because if people like you send their kids to private schools, then what will happen to the public system? So it's every city, every community is different. That is why it is centralized coordination and decentralized governance. And the hard part is really the governance. And when I build DAOs and I help build DAOs, the hardest part is to say, what are we doing here? What is this for? And that's where people get stuck. It's like, you're right. I don't know what our company's supposed to do. I don't know. I haven't thought deeply what is the point of our existence? What is the point of what we're doing? And if I think we do that, then the economy just comes after that.
Totally coming back to the values, yes, and what matters. So you've worked on the Bhutan blockchain strategy, which I kind of gauge with those intangibles. It's quite different from the recently approved Genius Crypto Act. So my question is, can you elaborate? Can you tell us what is your opinion in the context of regenerative versus extractive?
Yeah,
I read an article which you posted on LinkedIn,
oh
so
yeah,
that's why
you
I'm
know,
asking you this.
of course, when I say thank you for the not so genius act, it's like you can understand what my thoughts are. Um, there is, like I wrote, a good, a bad and ugly aspect to it. So the good aspect of any regulation, and I'm not to the uh, idea that regulation is a bad thing, and because it's all about that constitutional vault. It's about how to design the cooperation between people. So you create a sandbox of murder, not a great idea, stealing, not a great idea, and yeah, and you can quantify it. This gets you tokens, this takes away from you tokens, this puts your token on ice. So I think the fact that there's now movement to create clarity, and there's that Clarity Act that passed, it's good. It's a step in the right direction. How do we codify these type of
And if you can also elaborate for the more recently published AI Act, because
yeah,
I have seen you commented on that as well.
yeah. Yeah, you really want to get me into trouble, but the problem with the Genius Act is, again, I think that people do not understand, because nobody reads the act, including myself. I didn't read the whatever hundreds of pages that were in there. It's, again, the intentions. What is it supposed to do? And so here's an example of a technology that should, or was designed or created to increase personal sovereignty. And basically, the way they're using it is to increase surveillance and reduce your sovereignty. And so when all the crypto folks start to say, this is amazing, this is great, it's like the answer is, for who? And when you start to understand that you're not invited to the party, yeah, there's a party. At the end, we were excluded from the party. Now there is a. You're not invited to that party. And I think that this is what people are failing to understand. Nobody there is talking about the bank of me, or the bank of we, or the bank of us. What they're saying is, how can we create a Chase coin and a Goldman coin, and things of that sort. So exactly. So again, to paraphrase Pamela, she said, these coins ain't for you. And so I think that it's important, and this is why it's so complicated for people to understand, because by the time they understand what we're trying to design, then to understand that they're misused, that is like, wow, this is really hard. So, morphine was not invented to create addicts. It was created to treat pain. But after 30 years being in pain management, I learned that not all pain is bad and not all pain relief is good. So when Adams thought about capitalism, he didn't think about the techno feudalism of, Jan Varoufakis talking about, where we live right now. And so when you log in to Amazon or into Meta, you just left the world of capitalism and entered the world of feudalism, entered the world that there's only one owner and you abide by their rules, not the rules of a free market. And so the problem with the Genius is that it is used in a way that would be the opposite of your intention, just like my travel agent, and not increase your sovereignty but decrease your sovereignty. Now, for AI, my critique is a little bit different, and that is, and this is why it was good that we mentioned a little bit ethical principles, is that it's only for America. It's only for
The arms
Americans.
race. I mean, it
Yes.
just continues the arms race.
Yes,
That's
and
all.
and I remember that I was moderating a talk, and someone, how, Miaela, when you have these questions that basically are more than a statement and a question. So as this guy stands up, and what about the Chinese that blah 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 blah, and they're going to do this and this and that, and I listened, and I said, this is an excellent question, because as we speak right now, by chance, there is also a parallel conference in Shanghai.
Mm.
And there was a gentleman there, just like you, that asked exactly the same question. except he said instead of China, he said, but the US will do it.
Exactly.
And I
It's a
said, so you,
win-lose
so I said,
paradigm.
and that's really what this is about, is
Yes.
if your basic thought is a model of scarcity, and this is capitalism. It's like, supply demand. That's how prices go up and down. So if your mindset, your constitutional vault is that of scarcity, then all the contract, if the master contract says there's only a limited amount of, then everything else that you're going to do is going to be a derivative of that. But if you say that it's abundance, it's regenerative, it is more, it is symbiotic, then that's a whole different set of rules. And the scarcity mindset comes from the commodity world. There's only a certain amount of oil, there's only a certain amount of gold, there's only a certain amount, so if the only way I can satiate my hunger is if I leave you hungry. Whereas in data is abundant. Data is the only thing that if you split it into two, it values more. The more you split it, the more valuable it is. And I was invited recently to a project about tokenizing gold-backed assets. That's now the big thing now. Real world assets be gold-backed. Sure. And then I listened, and at the end I said, let me get this straight. No, I didn't say anything. Then they said, Dr. Cahana, you haven't said anything. Do you want to say something? I said, I'm not sure that you want to hear what I have to say. They said, no, no, please, please. I said, I just want to ask you, let me get this straight. What you're suggesting is that there's gold in the ground in a country. So we bury a hole in the ground to extract the gold, to then clean it, to then transport it with a plane, to put it in another country that has a hole in the ground, and we put it there with people surrounded to guard the newly minted gold in a hole. So you take gold from one hole and you move it to a gold with another hole, and you have now people that forever you have to pay them a bank and guards and everything forever. That's the business, and that's what's supposed to make this world a better place. Just if I understand. And they looked at me and they said, "Yeah, you're right. We didn't want to hear what you have to say."
So this is exactly, I mean, I wanted also, of course, and this was implicit in the introduction, to invite you to speak about your experience, and in particular about this latest Bhutan experience with the gross national happiness and tokenization of everything, and of the intangibles at our beneficial general intelligence conference, because we are on this for good. I mean, really, all what you spoke about is deep into our fabric, I can say. And of course, I will send you a formal invitation as well. But now, in closing, I would like to ask you, do you imagine, or either whatever last word you want to leave us with, but our community is really dedicated to make this world a better world with technology, and in particular, of course, with a decentralized AI, which involves both blockchain and artificial intelligence. So it would be, how would you imagine a world where our technologies don't just serve utility or growth, exactly as you are saying, but truly honor human dignity, interdependence, love, as you mentioned here? Is there possible? I know that you mentioned in one of your podcasts Iceland, and we are headed there with our artificial general intelligence. You told me they contacted you, that they were interested. I hope more countries would be interested. But how would we achieve that? What
I
is your
think,
last
yeah, I think that,
hopeful word?
yeah, no, it's very hopeful, and I hope that people are leaving with this, excited. There's a British philosopher called Mark Fisher that um, has this idea of called capitalist realism, and where he says, we're so enamored with this idea that the current model is just the only model that we can exist, that they can't imagine anything else. And I think that we have all the ingredients in this. We know how to do this. The problem is that we only do this large scale collaboration when there's a catastrophe. When there's a fire in Los Angeles, then suddenly everybody helps each other, and suddenly everybody knows how do you build houses in a village, how do you barter, how do you create, a economic activity that is not dependent on the US dollar. It didn't disappear. We just neglected it. And again, a little bit philosophical is there's nothing to discover. The fact that now we know what Higgs boson is doesn't mean that it didn't exist yesterday. We just now have a language to explain it. So what you and I are creating is a language to explain all these things that in countries like Bhutan or Vanuatu or in the Amazons is very straightforward. It says, I don't understand why people would not want to do what you want to do. And I'm like, do you not understand that people don't want to talk to me? It's like, and they're like, what do you mean? This makes total sense. Or when I talk to Gen Zers or Alphas, they're like, this is so cool. I want to do this. Or they understand this. So maybe my final note is that as a doctor, we use Greek words for our practice. We say diagnosis, prognosis. Those are all Greek words, old words. One of the words that we use to describe medical history is called anamnes. Anamnes means recall. It's a medical history. So when I talk to a patient, I take their anamnes. I ask them to recall, which means that the knowledge already exists. It already exists in us. We just need to pull it out and connect the dots and tell a narrative that makes sense. So my expectation is not that the audience here is going to say, oh, I agree with everything. The only request that I have, and with this I'll end, is that the listeners right now, I am sure, have one of three emotions. Either they'll say, oh my God, what he said is exactly how I feel. It just he articulated it so well. Yeah, other ones might say, oh my God, if he's right, we're screwed, which is fine. And then others saying, why am I listening to this? Why am I, why am I, the podcasts are so interesting. And this one is like so out there. So like Mihail is right. This guy's like a crazy, I don't know about the genius, but why am I listening to this? So all what I'm asking the audience is that when they shut down, to ask themselves, in what group do they belong? If they belong in the first group, call me, continue and build. If they don't like what they heard, reach out to me, tell me what they don't like, and let's see how we can bridge between those worlds because they're not mutually exclusive. And for those who don't understand, then please call me, tell me that your explanation did not satisfy me and why not, and we'll find another language to use so it will resonate. But I believe that it is inevitable for our survival that we will do the right thing.
And so do I, and so do we, and our community here. And thank you so much for your time, Dr. Cahana. And I look forward, and we look forward to see you in person at our Beneficial General Intelligence Summit.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for the invitation.